Hello, ketogenic people of the world. All right, today we're going to talk about some very important things and one very important mistake. Yesterday, in one of my videos, I told you that you needed between 4,000 and 5,000 milligrams of sodium. Oh my gosh, April, how could you do that? All right, that's not sodium, that's potassium. Potassium is so important that sometimes I talk about it when I'm talking about sodium. All right, so to be clear, sodium is between 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams, more like between 2,000 to 2,500 milligrams, kind of in the lower range. I have to go to the higher range, but most people, they can stay to the lower range. Okay, so now that we've cleared that up, we're going to talk about electrolytes. We're going to talk about sodium and potassium. More specifically, we're going to talk about the sodium-potassium pumps in the cells. Okay, so each of your cells has sodium-potassium pumps. I like to refer to them as revolving doors with keys. So I'm going to tell you how that door revolves and what the key is. So I want you to imagine a cell. We're going back to old school biology, right? We've got the outside fluid and the inside fluid. And then along the cell wall, we have a door kind of shaped like this that's open to the inside. So this is the inside of the cell. There are three little binding sites for sodium. So the sodium that's inside of the cell is going to bind 1, 2, 3 to this side of the pump. And an ATP cell, or better known, April, it's not a cell. Okay, we're going to try that again. Once the sodium has bound itself to these binding sites, you're going to have an ATP molecule. It's going to come, it's an energy molecule. It's going to come and it's going to attach here, and it's going to drop one of its phosphate molecules right there. When this ATP and the phosphate bind, the door snaps shut and it opens to the outside. When it does, it lets loose of those 3 sodiums. So now new sites open up, 1, 2, and those are potassium binding sites. So you got the potassium out here and it comes to the inside and it attaches 1, 2. After that happens, the phosphate that attached out here, in here on the inside of the cell, will pop off, bing, and when it does, that pump or that revolving door snaps shut and it opens to the inside. Okay? And when it's on the inside, the potassium, they're up here, the potassium, they are knocked off and 3 sites for sodium open up. And we do it all over again, right? We just keep going in a circular motion. So energy, life is movement. When a cell stops and becomes stagnant, it dies, it doesn't move, so we have to have that fluid continuously moving. So what happens if the ATP is not there to open up? So if the ATP doesn't come and attach here and leave its little phosphate molecule, if that doesn't happen, the cell doesn't, the pump, the door doesn't change shape. It doesn't snap shut and open to the outside. It doesn't bring in its potassium. We don't do this. Okay, it's really important. I want you to keep that in your mind. I want you to hold it in your mind, because people that go on a ketogenic diet are generally people who everything else has not worked. They've got some health issues. They're tired. They're exhausted. They do not have the capabilities to make energy like the average person. Okay, something's wrong. we've got a metabolic disease or a syndrome, we've got some type of issue that is preventing the carbohydrates, the sugars that we take in from becoming energy. We're just storing it. We're not really using it as energy anymore. So we don't have the energy to turn on that revolving door, to change the shape of that pump. We don't have the ATP to do that. So what happens? The sodium sits in the cell and it drowns the cell. It literally fills up and it drowns the cell. You have to be able to have the energy. So the ketogenic diet is good because instead of using sugar for energy, which does not work for us anymore, we're using ketones that we're making from all those years of storing all that fat. We're making from all that fat, from the fat that we eat, and hopefully from the fat that's on our body. Our liver takes it and turns it into ketones, and those ketones then turn into ATP, and ATP unlocks that. It attaches here, leaves the phosphate, bink, bink. Then we have that transfer. Then we have a healthy, happy cell again. There's another important thing to this. The amount of potassium and the amount of sodium. So there's less potassium binding sites on the outside than there is sodium binding sites on the inside. Why is that? The body wants to get rid of more sodium than potassium. Okay? So it's getting rid of extra sodium to bring in more potassium. It's more important for the cell to get rid of more sodium because, like I said earlier, the sodium drowns the cell. The sodium is important. It keeps the fluid at a state where it's going to stay. Think of salt water and fresh water. Think of the Dead Sea, where people literally can just sit in the water and read a newspaper, and think of fresh water, where you're just going to sink to the bottom. You can't do that in fresh water. Okay, so one is more firm than the other, right? And so you want a certain amount of firmness to keep everything where it needs to be so that things just don't leak out. Does that make sense? I hope so. It does to me. Okay, so we need both sodium and potassium. When we're first starting a ketogenic diet, we focus more on the sodium to keep the potassium and the magnesium and the fluids in the body because we're dehydrating the body. So our body's working because we've got energy now, right? We've got that ATP that's transferring the sodium and the potassium back and forth. And now we have dehydration because we are lessening the amount of sugar that goes into our body, and it's taking with it all those 3 molecules of water. I don't want you to think that sodium is God, because it's not. Potassium is. Sodium keeps it where it needs to be, and that's important right now. But we need to focus on potassium for the long haul. Sodium for now, potassium for the long haul. So what I recommend to get enough potassium is between 7 to 12 cups of leafy greens. So that's 7 to 12 ounces. I used to say like 7 to 10, but I've just done the math and it just doesn't seem like enough. So, between 7 to 12, depending on your health. If you are really unhealthy, you need more potassium than sodium. You need to help out that system. You need to help out that exchange. People that go into the hospital or the doctor or wherever, and they're told you need to cut back on your sodium, it's raising your blood pressure. It's not fully what's going on. If they had the same amount of sodium but had the right requirements of potassium, they would more than likely be fine. But they have such low potassium and such high sodium. It's the imbalance that makes the problem. And we want to keep the balance, if that makes sense. We want to keep the sodium and the potassium in balance so that the electrical signals in our heart can fire, because we are actually an electrical being. If things aren't moving and ions aren't exchanging, we're nothing. We are dead, actually. Okay, so let me show you where I get my potassium. Other than food, that free avocado every day, the 7 to 10 cups of greens, which I haven't got of recent. So I've been having to take extra potassium. I take potassium salts, okay? 1 teaspoon is 150 milligrams, and on average, I take about a tablespoon a day. I'm not saying that's what you need to take a day, but if you have headache, fatigue, constipation, heart palpitations, like a pounding heart that you can hear, if you have muscle weakness, muscle paralysis, tingling in your extremities, what else? If you have those things, you need to take some potassium. But all the electrolytes kind of have similar symptoms, right? So sodium, if you're low on sodium, you're going to be nauseous, you're going to have weakness, you're going to have confusion, headache, fatigue. You're going to have those things. Magnesium, you're going to have muscle cramps, high blood pressure, high heart rate. I have that. Your muscle twitching, muscle weakness, and irregular heartbeat. Okay, those are all things that are magnesium. So you need to get yourself a list. What's potassium? What's sodium? What's magnesium? Don't take my word for it. Go and look it up and figure out what you need to take. I'll tell you the daily recommendations for magnesium, I believe, are between 400 and 600 milligrams. I prefer the chelated magnesium, but a lot of people prefer this, Natural Calm. It has 325 milligrams. Make you sleep real good, take away any muscle cramps, bring down your blood pressure. It'll do things like that. I showed you the potassium and, of course, the sodium. Get the pink or the gray. Get whichever one you like, whichever color makes you happiest. And remember to track it. Track it for yourself. If you're taking the right amount of sodium, so what is the right amount? The right amount is 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon first thing in the morning. If you have adrenal issues, if you have stress, if you have several kids, if you gain weight in your middle, okay, if you have a high stress job, a high stress life, if you're losing your hair, you're going to want to take 1/4 to 1/2 teaspoon of salt in the morning, right when you wake up, first thing, okay? And then throughout the day, you're going to take the rest of that teaspoon of salt. You're going to take 1/8 or 1/4 teaspoon here and there in water, salt your food, you'll be fine. And if you're doing everything that you know to do with sodium and you're feeling bad and you can't figure out, is it sodium, potassium, or magnesium, lean towards potassium and magnesium because you've already got that sodium covered for the day. We won't worry so much about sodium in about 3 weeks. But for the first 2, it's important. We don't want to get sick. We don't want to get the keto flu. All right, I hope this video helped you out. I hope I was able to shed some light on how electrolytes affect our body and how the ketogenic diet affects our electrolytes. Thanks for joining me. Hope you enjoyed the video.